President Trump heads to the Middle East. The last surviving American hostage is released by Hamas. We have a China trade deal. We have a price-fixing executive order. We have big, beautiful bill updates. We have Bourgeois Bernie, and so much more. It is going to be a crazy day here on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
This week, President Trump takes the first international trip of his new term. He's headed to the Middle East, where he's focused on a number of things, but first and foremost, trying to end the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The beginning of this trip will be marked by a major diplomatic success, the release of the last remaining American hostage held by Hamas. Edan Alexander from New Jersey has been held for over 580 days in Gaza. We know that at least 12 Americans were taken hostage during the October 7th attack. We also know that at least 4 have been confirmed dead, but we've not been able to retrieve their bodies yet from Hamas in Gaza. There remains 59 hostages. We have no idea how many of those remain alive. But as President Trump is in the Middle East, particularly as he's in Qatar, we hope that he can continue to exert pressure on Hamas to get more information and to end this conflict as soon as possible, while still ensuring that there's accountability both for Hamas and for their funders in Qatar. This is a complex situation. Qatar's getting some credit for the release of Edan Alexander, even though they funded both the October 7th attack and the captors who have held Alexander and all of these hostages for such a long time. After a weekend of negotiations described as marathon talks, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced major progress in a trade deal with China.
This is a 90-day pause. For our tariff program, we had a plan, we had a process, and now what we have with the Chinese is a mechanism to avoid an upward tariff pressure like we did last time.
While this is a bit of a deal for a future deal and sort of a step in the major direction of larger trade talks, markets reacted incredibly positively with about a 1,000-point jump on Monday morning. Now, don't check your 401ks just yet, but this is valuable progress in one of the deals that will be most consequential to this entire trade agenda. Also on Monday, President Trump announced an executive order focused on reducing the cost of prescription drugs in America. While the sentiment behind this, reducing the cost of exorbitant prescription drugs and ending the European freeloading, where Europeans pay incredibly low costs but benefit from the R&D and development of incredibly important cures and prescription drugs that are designed here in America, there are some dissenting opinions on this issue.
Most favored nation, that's what it's called, most favored nation. This cropped up
the least favorable
to
us.
Right.
The other thing he's got to focus on is no price controls on pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
That is going to be a disaster. It's a pro-China, pro-India, pro-China. China's investing tons of money in biopharmaceuticals. And if we put price controls here, guess what happens? That investment dries up.
I'd also recommend reading Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal on this. But tackling the problem by taking it out on the innovators, by importing other countries' backward policies, will only harm the world's greatest producer of cures and replicate those countries' failing systems. Europe's price controls have reduced its once thriving pharmaceutical industry to dust, while Europeans and Australians and Canadians have access to far fewer new drugs than are available to Americans, including breakthrough cancer treatments. Those nations also show how a lack of innovation leads to even higher healthcare costs in the long run. I take anything Kim Strassel says as valuable and important. I think we all understand the sentiment behind this. The system is clearly broken. When you see a bill after, a stay in the hospital, or, when you see what your insurance has paid for a prescription drug, it's absurd. And it's even more absurd when you see the fact that Europe has set their price controls so low, so we are in a sense subsidizing their entire drug market. So that obviously is broken. But as the administration that has come in as the greatest change agents that we'll probably see in government, in our lifetimes, I would have hoped for a much larger focus on real reforms that last, not simply importing the sort of price control model that Europe is using. This is the moment to make real fixes and real reforms that even the playing field. And I think there's a lot of concern that this is only going to make the problem worse, but also that it will empower countries like China to continue to absorb what we have been doing as far as creating life-saving cures in our pharmaceutical industry. So I hope that we can find a more lasting solution on this. Over the weekend, footage was released showing a number of Democrats, including a representative from New Jersey named LaMonica McIver, storming an ICE facility in New Jersey. As you can see in this footage, McIver is seen in red assaulting ICE, pushing, shoving, and trying to force her way into this ICE facility. DHS released more information about this facility, saying that it houses suspected murderers, terrorists, child rapists, and MS-13 gang members. The second incident happened in Worcester, Massachusetts, when a Democrat city council member led a mob to try and physically stop ICE from carrying out an arrest of an illegal immigrant who had assaulted a pregnant woman. It's easy to draw a direct line in escalation from Democrats traveling down to El Salvador to glorify Abrego Garcia, a suspected MS-13 gang member who both assaulted his wife and was likely involved in human trafficking, now to storming ICE facilities and trying to physically intervene to stop ICE from deporting dangerous criminal illegal immigrants. One thing that we know from exorbitant amounts of polling is deporting illegal immigrants with violent criminal records has more than 90% support for the American people. And it's a little bit scary to think of where the next escalation is going to go for Democrats as they try and stop this incredibly important action of securing our cities, making our neighborhoods safer from taking place. The Big Beautiful Bill marches forward. Over the weekend, House Republicans released the health policies included in their Big Beautiful Bill proposal. Those focus on things like a Medicaid work requirement. Last week, we talked about just how popular proving that people that are receiving Medicaid are eligible to receive Medicaid actually is. This also includes things like proof of citizenship requirement. It includes things like ensuring Medicaid funds are not going to things like transgender surgeries and abortion. We'll continue to see where this sort of pushes to, but we've already seen pushback from both Democrats and CBO saying things like these eligibility checks will lead to as many as 13 million people losing their health care. However, we've heard this before. I was in the Senate in 2017 when we passed a bill to, for example, get rid of the Obamacare individual mandate. CBO said nearly identically, 13 million people would lose their health care if you got rid of that individual mandate. But that ended up being completely wrong, and it was actually a very big scandal that CBO had been off as much as they were. Not only did 13 million people not lose their health care, a lot more people got health care in the long run, despite the end of that individual mandate penalty. So it's really important to consider CBO's role in this, and also consider in the past how their incorrect projections have actually gotten lawmakers to do less and to take less valuable, expansive steps in fixing bad policies. But to highlight just how popular some of these steps are, we're going to look at polling from the FGA, the Foundation for Government Accountability. 69% support work requirements, 85% support eligibility verification, 82% support ongoing eligibility checks. I'd also recommend that you read House Energy and Commerce Chairman Brett Guthrie's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about how their proposal actually helps Medicaid, actually strengthens Medicaid by getting so much of the fraud, waste, and abuse out of it so that the program can actually work to continue to help the people who actually need it. The elderly, the disabled, children who don't have access to better income to pay for different insurance. That's who this is actually for. But the fraud, waste, and abuse, and the fact that millions of able-bodied people who should not be on Medicaid are filling up those roles right now is actually hurting the program. But again, as Democrats, the media, and CBO and others talk about massive cuts to this, the FGA, the Foundation for Government Accountability, has also released a study that highlights that even with these cuts to waste, fraud, and abuse, over 10 years, Medicaid will still expand by 25%. So again, I don't know if you can call something a draconian cut if it still allows a program to expand by 25%. You can't make it up. We have talked before about some of the crazy lawsuits where blue states and blue cities are trying to sue energy companies saying that they caused climate change, that they caused bad weather, that they caused wildfire. There's no attribution involved and there's no real science involved, but they know that if they sue these oil and gas companies for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, they can use that to fund other priorities. Hawaii has sued a number of oil and gas companies, accusing them of causing sea level rise and things like that. However, However, the Washington Free Beacon reports they left out the largest emitter in the state, Par Pacific, who operates the state's sole petroleum refinery and is the #1 supplier of gasoline and jet fuel. Now, why, I ask, would Hawaii leave out one single oil and gas company? The Washington Free Beacon reports that this company has given exorbitant amounts of campaign funding to Democrats in Hawaii. Imagine that. Perhaps this isn't some righteous rally against climate change, but just another political operation to get Democrats more money. For our final segment of the day, we have Bourgeois Bernie with a quiet part out loud segment you won't forget.
Think I'm going to be sitting on a waiting line at United? Waiting, 30,000 people are waiting.
Now remember, this private jet is taking Bernie on his Fighting Oligarchy tour, which we've discussed previously was funded, in fact, by left-wing oligarchs. So Bernie's taking private jets. He, again, is far too important to sit with the poors at United Airlines to fight oligarchs on behalf of other oligarchs. This reminds me of one of my favorite Bernie Sanders stories of all time. When Bernie was running for president against Hillary Clinton in 2016, Hillary's supporters released a video where they highlighted the fact that Bernie Sanders, his entire career, had focused his fire on the evils of millionaires and billionaires.
Billionaires and billionaires. This is a budget of the billionaire class, by the billionaire class.
So what you just saw there, when Bernie Sanders became a millionaire, he no longer was concerned about millionaires and billionaires. It was just the billionaires. Incredibly inconvenient for soak-the-rich Bernie Sanders that he became, thanks to capitalism, quite rich. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on 10 Minute Drill. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you on Thursday.